In this episode, we welcome Rhona Steller to the podcast. She is a professional in the early childhood sector for the past 17 years, and she's currently a lecturer in early childhood at Marino Institute of Education. She completed her PhD in 2023, and she is also a mommy to 2 young girls herself. She has recently taken a step towards starting her own business, the Play Lab, and she is about to tell us all about play, and it's going to be a very interesting conversation about different types of play and what it really provides and how it really supports children's development. Delighted to welcome Rhona to the podcast today. Hello, how are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. We're going to talk about all things play, early childhood development.
My favourite topic.
So if you close your eyes and think about kids playing, what comes to mind? First thing.
Oh, so many things. For me, play isn't just one thing. It can be lots of things. It's a sense, I think. It's a feeling. It's a way of being. It's nearly like a poise rather than an activity, if I think about it like that.
Do you think we should have different words for different, play is such a broad thing, as you just mentioned. When I go to do the training in schools, I find that, teachers think that play is just chaos and children building towers or kicking balls. And I think there should be another word for like the actual, one involves connection and learning and experience and something meaningful.
In my work, there is a lot of rich language to describe play.
Okay.
But you mentioned chaos, and it looks like just chaos. And I suppose that relates back to what I said. For me, play doesn't look like just one thing because it can be so many different things. It can be different things within different children. It can be different things within the same child at different times. It can look differently for different ages and stages. And that type of play that I think you're talking about and I'm talking about, what we tend to use in academic terms is a thing called ludic play. And that type of ludic play refers to, maybe some people will call it free play or independent play, but ludic play is quite specific because what we're talking about is, first of all, a play that is intrinsically motivated by the child. So for play in this term to be truly play, it has to be freely chosen by the child. So that's where the free or the independence comes in. It's not always goal orientated. So then when we're looking at it, we can't see the intrinsic motivation, the intrinsic choice, and we can't see a goal because there isn't always one. And I always say that with play, it can be quite difficult to see the learning or to see what's going on, because learning is an internal process inside someone's heart, hands, inside their mind. And of course, myself, yourself, others working in education, play therapy can make a really good guess, but ultimately we can't really ever know. So that type of ludic play, it's about freedom. Choice, control, autonomy, agency are the types of words that I use in my work. And it's important that children have time to engage in that type of play. So there's lots of things that we can do to support it. But one of the key things is making time, making space, slowing down, giving them a moment to get into that play mode. It's a type of play mode that we would describe, perhaps you call a child's name and they don't hear you, they're lost in the play. So it's a way of being in childhood, and in some ways it's a gift, because the world that we grew up into and that children are growing up into is changing so much. We can't really predict what it's going to look like. The job world isn't what it looks like. The globalization is a big factor. But having a place where a child can go to relax, to kind of connect inward with themselves, to have that peace, that freedom, is something that's going to stand to them. But that's not the only reason that they play or the learning that happens through play. We know that that type of play is fundamental to human development from a range of fields of study. And I can get into the learning that happens in that type of play, but something else that I would just say is when I think of play, and you said, just going back to the point where you said that teachers say to you, it feels like chaos, and certainly it can feel like chaos for sure. But there's also, I picture like a speedometer or a windscreen wiper, and it's an image that's in our early childhood curriculum framework, Ashter. So it's this speedometer where on the one hand we have this free play or the ludic play, and then we have a range of other play types with adult involvement that goes the whole way from free play to adult guided activities. So there's a space for them all.
Yeah. So that makes me think, when we go, for example, I've seen that a lot when I sat at workshops, and children come in and they start looking around, and parents call them, Johnny, come look at this. Billy, come look at that. Lucy, come look at this, do this. And the child, they feel so overwhelmed. So I suppose that's something that we could avoid as parents, to just acknowledge that they need their own time to immerse themselves into the play and feel comfortable.
I think
trust the space.
Yeah, I think it definitely can take time. It can take trust, but also perhaps in those initial moments, an invitation can be helpful. So of course they need a moment, like a lot of us, to arrive, to check it out, to decide, to maybe collaborate with that sort of the sensory experiences that are coming in. Like some of the play spaces that we can go to can have quite an echo because they need to be big, so even just getting used to that. But also, to be fair to their parents, sometimes that invitation can be helpful and can help them to settle in, so that adult directed piece, and then we can pull back and we can become an observer. So we're still connected because we're observing and we're enjoying, but they're leading, and they've taken the reins then.
Yeah. So let's have a look at things that are not play, or myths, some myths about play.
Sure.
So I'm going to read them, and then you can tell me what you think about that, and why you think people think that. Play is just for fun. It's not real learning.
The research that I am familiar with in play, that children choose themselves in comparison to adult guided activities, and in particular I'm thinking of maybe worksheets or product-based art. The research that I'm aware of is that children tend to set more difficult challenges for themselves in the activities that they choose for themselves. They tend to use richer, more complex language, and the cognitive learning that is required within those tasks where the challenges are more difficult and the language is more complex is richer as well. Oftentimes, if we're setting an adult guided task, as something that we've decided, we might focus on one thing with one outcome. When children are playing, what you'll notice is that they tend not to focus just on one discrete aspect of learning. Even the youngest children tend to be doing more than one thing at a time. So there's coordinated thinking or coordinated action involved. So there's a lot of research to support that the challenges that children set for themselves within play are complex and probably involve a greater stretch than we can imagine. Doesn't mean that we are uninvolved. And in fact, we can play a really crucial role in helping that stretch, or setting up the environment, or being an advocate, or helping them to slow down. Or like a child who is not calm can't think. And if they can't think and they're not calm, it's going to be harder for them to get into play, which is kind of similar to what you said about arriving in a space, arriving physically and emotionally. So it's not that we're uninvolved, but equally we don't have to direct. And then just to, I suppose, debunk the myth that play, I would feel with play that there is always learning. It's not the goal per se learning, but the learning is happening. And the way that I like to think of it, there's an author, Sandra Duncan, so this is her analogy. And she talks about the type of play in under threes, which can often be working on figuring something out. So figuring out the way something works. So it might be dropping or throwing or putting things in a category or covering. And we call that schematic learning. And she describes the image of bees, buzzy bees. Think about them all around a lavender bush. And if you watch them and you can smell the lavender, you can see the bees, they're buzzing all around the bush. You don't know precisely what they're doing. You know that they're probably picking pollen up and putting it down. And, you've been told that, but you can't really see exactly what they're doing. And with children's learning, I think it can be quite like that, where you can't precisely see, but you know that they're working on something themselves. So that's a way that I love to think about play.
Very powerful, thank you. The next one is structured activities are more beneficial than free play. And I guess that comes from the sense of need for control from the adult.
Yeah. So there are so many things to that. First of all, I suppose it goes back to the role of the adult. Okay. So we spoke a good bit there about the freedom of play and intrinsically motivated play. And when an adult becomes involved, depending on the nature of their involvement, the goal can change. So it can become more motivated by the adult. So I would move away from thinking about structured activities and I would move towards thinking about how I'm involved in play when I do want to be involved and what I'm doing, So we can think of things like in my work when I'm thinking about how I am with children and the way that I connect with them, what we think about is our image of children or our image of childhood. So generally, what do we expect from children? How do we view them? Do we view them as people with thoughts, desires, motivations? Or do we view them as people who need to be told what to do, who don't know enough, don't have enough? And I think that speaks a little bit to what you're saying about who should be in control, because that's a view of who needs to be in control potentially. And if we want to move away from the structured adult activities and we want to move towards play and partnerships and play, we can think about things like the environment. How is it working for us? So at home, that's even something that you can think about. How is this play environment work? Is it serving us? If it's not, is there maybe something we need to do? Maybe it's too cluttered. Maybe what would work really well is kind of putting a toy out in a favourite spot that we can play with easily for a couple of days. Being an advocate for play. So being someone who says, yeah, we do need time to slow down. Sometimes we need to turn off the telly so that we can kind of get into that play mode. Maybe recognise the challenges. Like I said earlier, it's not only, setting up the physical environment or the play space, but it's setting that emotional environment and supporting that element of calm and connection so that children are ready to play.
Yeah, I love that. And it builds that trust and they feel that you trust them.
Yeah, and sometimes we want to play with them or sometimes we can model and play. That is okay. That's an important role that works really, really well as well. Sometimes to show them or to add a challenge. We notice they're getting a little bit disinterested in what they're working on, so we might mix it up by offering some more materials or different materials, or noticing what's working well, or chatting to them about what they're doing, and that can ignite the play again.
Yeah, absolutely. Play requires expensive toys or materials. What do you think about that?
I don't think so. I do think that the play environment is important and it is a backdrop. So it requires thought to perhaps the way things are set up. I think that having a little bit less is more. So some classic materials could go quite a long way.
Who doesn't love a cardboard box?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. A cardboard box, Play-Doh. Sometimes it's the simple stuff that can really like we love playing with blankets and teddies and making teddies cozy. That's not expensive stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all know, like, if you put it, this test that they put a remote control or a baby toy, the child's going to pick the remote control, or the wooden spoon from the kitchen, or all the real stuff. So whatever you have at home, that's safe for your child.
Absolutely.
Works as a toy, because I think toys are just connectors between the child and what's around the child.
Yes.
They connect each other or with the environment. So anything works.
Yes, absolutely. Anything works. Yeah.
Brilliant. Quality time only counts if it's planned. So if we plan an activity, it's fine. But if it's something, we're stuck in the moment and we have to improvise something, it's not really playtime.
Yeah, I think, again, what this makes me think of is it makes me think of that sense of perhaps trying to capture images or an imagination of my own childhood. So I think sometimes if someone says, can you think of your own childhood or, what you like to play with, that can be quite a hard image to capture.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you were to think of a sense of your own childhood perhaps as maybe a sense of summer, of the sand between your toes, of the water on your feet, of the sense of autumn, of kicking leaves, or of the sense of the winter, of that cold blast on your face, those senses. And then that makes me think of the positive dispositions, and we can talk a little bit about what I mean by disposition, but that sense of the positive dispositions of the child, of being playful, being relaxed, being very much in the moment. And it's not about expensive toys or big experiences or big days out. I'm sure, some of them were important, but really it was about little moments, moments of being present, of being connected. And maybe, there's questions around, I suppose, that pressure to feel like you have to do something or to go out, or to be entertaining. And that's not necessary. Again, this notion of slowing down, of just having time to be there. And maybe some of that pressure to go out is because for, when you have small children, it can be very, very busy. It can be messy. It can be overstimulating, Playing might not feel like everyone's cup of tea. I'm in a world where I am absolutely embedded in it, surrounded by eat, drink and sleep it. It's my passion. That's not a world that everyone is in. For some people, they're, in a job, they're coming home and they have jobs to do then at home, and play might feel like a job, So in that situation, maybe there is a sense of, being graceful with yourself, recognizing that spending 5 minutes sitting on the floor, just simply sitting there and being connected and, having the phone away from you for those few minutes, that is really, really valuable. And it's precious for you as much as it is precious for your child.
Absolutely. And that's one of the next ones, is that we need to spend a lot of time playing with our children every day to really connect with them.
I always say that children, when they're learning in a social context. And what I mean by that is that, yes, they're learning through play, but they're also learning through daily life activities and daily routines. So for young children, a lot of the way that we connect with them is in small moments and daily routines. So there's loads of connection, back and forth conversation within routines. And if you think of, for example, maybe a child who's still wearing a nappy, sometimes when we're changing the nappy, we'll say to them, oh, seems like it's time to change your nappy. And even the youngest children, babies, get a sense of what that means. So if you were to even think of a 3-month-old, you say that and you put your hands out, you'll notice their hands go up towards you. older babies, 6 months, the intonation is more obvious from them, like the hands really go up. And then older babies again will even say something, about the nappy or whatever. So we change the nappy, but we might pause. There might be a little bit of a nursery rhyme or a little bit of back and forth or chat, or can you help me? And you hold the nappy. And those moments are powerful learning. And I'm not sure if people understand that in that relationship, in that reciprocity, that huge development is happening for a child.
What happens when, instead of that interaction, the child's holding a phone, looking at cartoons? Or what doesn't happen?
What doesn't happen? I think in an instance like that, say if we're going to be specific just about the nappy changing, it's maybe just opening the awareness a little bit, so maybe it's a case of holding something as helpful, because maybe they're moving a lot. So just in that particular instance, so it might be just swapping it out. I think in terms of screen time, it's a whole other conversation for sure. I think we need very much balance, but I do think also that an awful lot of screen time leaves children dysregulated. So, there's a balance to be had with it for sure.
Yeah, again, conversation for another time. Another one, parents, and you mentioned that already a little bit, parents need to entertain their children constantly to connect with them, to keep them busy.
Yeah. I think no is the hard answer to that. So I suppose it's asking questions, isn't it? Asking questions about our assumptions. So we all have assumptions. By the nature of assumptions, we're not aware of them. That's what an assumption is, something we're not aware of. Okay? So do we need to be busy? Do we need to be entertained? If we, if you think back to what we were saying about play there a moment ago, that it can sometimes take a moment to decide what they want to play with, how they want to play. So feeling a responsibility and ownership over that and needing to sort of lead and guide that might be a misnomer for a parent. And I suppose it's putting yourself under pressure that you don't need to be under, actually.
Yeah, I totally agree. And let them get bored.
Yeah.
Boredom is great.
Yes. Yeah. Have a time to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Again, play invitations can be so simple. So finding ways to make gentle, simple play invitations that can work, that can, I suppose, hand over the play to a child and let them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes as well, children, they're so clever. And again, going back to maybe it's this image of the child, what do we think of them, what do we expect of them? Like the youngest children kind of already, they know what's happening next. So they know if we come in, we're going to be expected to play with some stuff or take out a toy or choose a toy and chill out for a while mum is getting dinner ready. Or they might know we come in and we flop and we go on the couch and turn on the TV. Whatever the expectation is, they're so attuned to it from an early age, so we can sort of, again, become aware of the assumptions that we're setting and what our expectations are. And when we bring that into our awareness, then we have a choice around it. But again, possibly it's easy for me to roll off the tongue when I'm used to thinking about play and noticing the detail in play. It's something that can happen over time, that we just notice when we're making, if you notice when you are making a choice and what that choice is, and you can check in and say, is this what I want? What is my expectation of my child right now? Is that reasonable?
Yeah.
Those asking yourself those types of questions can, I suppose, just bring into your awareness that you are making a choice.
Yeah.
And we make lots of choices, and that's okay. There's no perfect right way to do things. Different people do things differently, and that's family life.
I think that's really powerful, knowing that we do have a choice. we always have a choice, and we choose that, thinking of the consequences. We might say, okay, I don't have a choice, I have to feed my children. Yes, you do have a choice. You cannot feed them now, you don't like the consequences. So, you do what you do based on the consequences. You obviously have to feed that child. But you always have a choice, knowing that it's really powerful.
Yeah.
Because whatever the behaviour is, we have a choice so we can change things.
Yeah.
And that's by doing it that we can figure out what works and what doesn't work for our family, our circumstances, and our children.
Yeah. You might choose, things like you might choose play materials, you might choose dry play materials like blocks because you made that choice for right now, it's a midweek. But another time you might choose paint. These are choices you might choose.
You're comfortable with at that moment.
Yeah. You might choose, there are times you might choose the telly.
Yeah. And that's what it is for.
Yes, that's okay. As you say, you probably choose to eat. I know personally, if we are dysregulated in our house, one of the first things that I think is, am I thirsty? Are they thirsty?
Needs,
Yeah, so that's what I'll think. So I tend not to, I like a good meal, that kind of way. So that's a priority. So I make choices around that.
Very good. Yeah, love that. One more. Good parents are always calm and patient. I'm a really bad parent.
So I mentioned the learning dispositions a little bit. And what a learning disposition is, it's a bit of a segue, but there is a point to it. What a learning disposition is, it's kind of like a personality trait. But if we say personality trait, what we think is something that's inbuilt or fixed. And a disposition is something that is flexible to the environment. So yes, we will have more natural preferences, but with a disposition, there's a potential for it to be altered or molded by the environment. So learning dispositions, as you can guess, are positive. They're towards learning. So a learning disposition might be a love of reading. Okay, so not everyone is going to find reading as easy as everyone else. But what we really want is for children to enjoy books, love books, because this is going to help their later literacy. So another learning, there's loads of learning dispositions, and that's one of the key essence of learning in early childhood, and one of the key things that we tend to focus on. But a disposition that perhaps we don't talk about very much is being graceful at failing. Okay? Maybe we set ourselves with really high standards, what are our expectations for ourselves? Are they attainable? Are they realistic? And if things don't go exactly as we planned, maybe apart from emphasizing the value of repair, maybe another thing that we need to just bear in mind is that sense of graceful failing. That wasn't what I wanted. That wasn't what I hoped for.
Expectations.
Yeah. What would I like? What would I like for that period of time to look like? So that morning getting out of the house, where I know that can be a transition, can be a trigger point for children, but I've noticed that can be a trigger point for me too. So what would I like to shift in that? Another thing that I think can be quite powerful is thinking about those little moments of connection. So we tend to give ourselves a hard time, maybe be really critical and have a strong critique. Were there moments, like I described, that beautiful moment around that nappy change that was connection? And sometimes maybe you're being so hard on yourself that you don't notice the connection. And for me, it's so important to notice those connections because they happen fleetingly. They happen continuously, and sometimes maybe if you're stressed, what you might tend to do is, as I said, be hard on yourself, focus on the negatives, and attract more stress. Whereas if you notice those moments of connection and joy, maybe you'll attract more of that and recognize it and bring your attention and awareness to that.
I think journaling could be really good for that, to really pay attention to those moments.
Yeah.
For me it would work, I think. But I'm just thinking now, maybe after I bring him to school, I could do 5 minutes off, write down what worked, what didn't work. Like acknowledge myself for the things that worked well that day and be proud of it, and then maybe see how I can what small changes can I make tomorrow. To make it a bit better than today.
I'm just thinking, like, because even some of it, you don't have to be better.
True.
You know, you are right. You are good enough. You are perfect for them. They're perfect for you. So, you know, it's that moment of connection. That eye contact means that you had an awareness of them. Say, you know, earlier, like you were saying, parents feel like they need to be in control, or they're trying to, you know, maybe with the very best of intentions, entertain or engage or spark. But in another space, maybe, you know, it's harder to notice, like, that little eye contact, or that moment where your child wasn't really clear, but you noticed their intention and you heard them. And then you really enjoyed seeing their reaction to you hearing them. So it can be hard when it is busy, you are stressed, you are overstimulated, to actually notice that moment. And for me, I suppose I have this, and even perhaps some of my language is very academic, but I do have this perspective. And I just felt, when I went back to work after my maternity leave, which was just a short few months ago, and I was getting back into my space for my lectures, and I was looking at all this stuff, the image of the child and the Ludic play, and, you know, whatever highfalutin things I can say. And I just had this sense, oh my goodness, I want to share this with my friends. It just reminded me, it actually gave me perspective, like, oh my gosh, like, what a beautiful time I'm having. And, you know, if I go to a supermarket and I have I have two small girls, and they're hanging out at me, and we look like a ball of chaos. And I find often, like, people, maybe especially mums who's are a little older, like they look like probably older children, they come over and they friendly, you know, and they say hello and they admire my children. I'm beaming, I'm so proud of these two little bundles of fire, basically. And they'll always say, oh, the days are long, but the years go fast. And, you know, sometimes you don't have a sense of what that means. But I think if you think about those moments, I just know for myself, I want to have some grasp on those moments. Something where I can just pause and say, yeah, I caught that. You know, okay, like, I have to get out the door. That is chaos. That is a big transition, getting out the door, and it's dysregulating for everyone. But I just know, for me personally, what I want is, if there's something happening there, connection between my two children, I just want to be able to not be so busy to miss it all the time, you know?
Yeah, knowing it's temporary.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that helps you enjoy it.
Yeah.
Even though it's hard.
Yeah, yeah. And then
it's part of life.
And it makes it easier in some ways then.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. How has becoming a mommy helped you or changed the approach that you used to? But tell us about your journey, actually.
Yeah.
What you do and what you have been doing in the past, and then how becoming a mommy has changed your approach as well. What you've learned from it.
Yeah. So when I go right back, but when I went from, I've always worked with young children or families or that type of stuff. Many years ago I did train as a play therapist. So I've let that lapse. I haven't continued with professional development or practice, so I wouldn't call myself a play therapist. And equally, my undergraduate studies are in psychology, and I have a postgraduate qualification in psychology, but I don't call myself a psychologist because they're quite particular parameters. And my PhD, my supervisors were psychologists, but the examiner wasn't. Okay, so I'm not a chartered psychologist. But so anyway, I was working with children and families. I was working in the charity sector, And in the recession, there were scandals and a heavy time to get people to donate, understandably. And I decided to move to early childhood. One of the motivating factors was that my mum actually had a creche herself, a full daycare. So that had been lovely.
And that was during your own childhood as well?
She opened it when I was 16.
Okay.
Yeah. So I suppose for me, I've would I say observer or had an awareness of the early childhood context in Ireland going back a long time. And I moved into that field. But all of the time for many years, I found myself Googling PhDs and looking up PhDs, but I just really felt I wouldn't be able to do a PhD. But I also knew I definitely wouldn't be able to do it while I was working. So I kind of, the Googling, got more and more, and I took the jump, and I actually signed up, interviewed for a full-time funded PhD, and I got that place it's called TU Dublin, Grange Gorman now. It's a beautiful campus. So I started that in 2016, and I actually I submitted when my first daughter was 8 months old, and then I did the Viva when I was 6 weeks pregnant. And then I graduated when my second was 6 weeks old.
That's really inspiring.
Yeah.
Well done.
And it's kind of a special time because I lived in a different place when I started the PhD. I hadn't met my husband. So it marks for me such a period in my life. And it's been wonderful. I had really amazing PhD supervisors. I always say, like Anne-Marie Halpenny and Professor Noreen Hayes always say that they really taught me how to be in the academic context, as well as, going on that sort of apprenticeship for research. So I'm a lecturer full time now, and I love it.
What was your biggest learning during the PhD in what you've actually researched?
The biggest learning, I suppose, and the piece that I enjoyed the most is recognizing the type of knowledge that is required for supporting learning in young children. Okay. And if you think of what we've been talking about so far, the daily routines, the play, what we're trying to do is we're trying to put our hands on and grasp at a way of describing holistic learning that's not very tangible. It's a type of wisdom or knowledge that is very reflective and reflexive. And also, it's very undervalued. So even yourself, you're saying play is just for fun, or, should not be entertaining children or offering structured activities. So, it's not recognized, it's not understood.
Is it because we can't see it?
I think part of it is because it's gendered as well. So it's related to something that is perhaps mothering, which is perhaps considered natural, and care in society isn't valued. So young children, their learning happens in a context where they feel emotionally safe. And we provide that context for them. And that's, as I said, the cognitive hard learning that's happening in that perhaps isn't best understood. And then in addition, care isn't very much valued.
And what happens if the environment is not safe at home? They go to school, they can't learn because they still feel that it's not safe. That makes learning very challenging.
Yeah, I suppose that's really when you're going into what you're asking, what happens when children don't have good attachment.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Because what I'm talking about is how do they learn? And then you can, of course, talk about what are the blocks to learning? How does trauma impact learning? What challenges can children face? And of course, it can impact learning, we can think about loads and loads of different aspects of it, like when you get into the school age side of things. I'm just even thinking, sleep or a sense of routine, that's emotional safety. But equally, when we're talking about play and learning, what we tend to talk about is like what goes into it. So the kind of thing that I would be thinking about is say like what goes into supporting a disposition. you know, or what goes into that sense of emotional safety. You know, so it's like what I spoke about a moment ago, being responsive. You know, it's that sense of that hearing in that moment, that connection, to supporting the disposition. So in the play, a type of disposition that I really value is perseverance. Okay, so it's really cool to see children playing and getting really stuck in, and like I have mentioned that, you know, they don't even hear if you're calling their name, and that's what they're doing, is they're persevering on something. And there's so many times that we need to persevere even though we might fail or something might not work first.
Is that linked with resilience and not giving up?
It's
Or what's
linked.
the difference?
It's linked. So I suppose perseverance is an action in the moment. Resilience might be a broader context, but certainly they both have to do with grit. They have to do with
commitment and
like growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So this growth mindset is a sense that, yes, I can fail, but even if I continue to fail and I keep going at it, eventually I will succeed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that, like, they're sort of they're interrelated, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because the growth mindset and the perseverance are connected to each other. That failing gracefully is connected, and they're perhaps all part of the bigger picture of resilience.
And that's all the things that you were saying. They're learning so much, but we can't see what they're learning. And
That's
these
right.
are the things that are happening in
Very
the background.
intangible.
Yeah.
Very intangible.
And how would you describe a positive learning environment in an early childhood classroom? What are the things that we could see or feel that makes us understand that it is a positive learning environment?
I suppose the big one that we tend to look at is that emotional climate. So that sense of being emotionally responsive, a sense also of reciprocity. So by reciprocity, I mean back and forth. So, but, you know, children are hardwired to connect. We all are. We're social beings, and as I said, children and ourselves too, as adults, we learn in a social context. So children want to connect with other children and with adults in an early childhood setting. So a setting that's emotionally warm, that children's cues are heard. So in my work in early childhood, we talk about the 100 languages of children. It comes from a practice called Reggio, a Reggio practice based in Reggio Emilia in Italy. And it's Lars Malaguzzi. Yeah, it's so cool, right? So essentially what that says, the 100 languages, is that children communicate, sure, yeah, with words, with language, but they communicate in hundreds of other ways. Through movement, through sound, through other vocalizations, through gestures, through art. So many, many different ways. And in an emotionally responsive environment, we hear those other languages of children. So you can picture that, you know, if you have a younger child who isn't speaking much yet, so I'm thinking like those 1 to 2s, they can be so clear without any words, you know, you can really hear that. So that tends to be what underpins quality. And then within that context, I spoke earlier about, I suppose it's probably a turn of phrase that we use in early childhood, the role of the adult. And that back and forth is really, really important. So when we're having a conversation, that it's bouncing like our conversation is here, back and forth and back and forth. There's so much rich learning in that. Children are in those conversations. What you'll notice is they tend to be reflecting on what happened or what they did or what they thought. And that can actually bring in quite complex language. And it can stretch their thinking, and it can help them to plan.
Yeah, so that just makes me think the most important thing is time.
Yes.
Time from the adult to notice things and to observe things and to respond to things and to anticipate things, knowing the previous experiences and things. But it's time. It's not the most expensive toys. It's not the most amazing resources. It's really the time you give to acknowledge what's going on and support that.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think it's time. It's slowing down. So when we say space, I mean like a temporal space.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that gives us the time then when we slow down to notice. And that loops right back around then to that challenge, that pressure that parents are under to, with the busyness, with the stress, to call in that space to slow down. And we're so governed by the clock as adults. Everything happens for us, and then we become so accustomed to be governed by the clock. And babies don't even know what a clock is yet, And we induct them into this, or we indoctrinate them into this way of being. So I think as well, children can truly be our greatest teachers, because maybe they can teach us another way or a different way.
Absolutely, yeah. And I was mentioning to you earlier that the work that I've done on myself and myself and the way I understand my own weaknesses and strengths and needs and interests and everything, it all happened after I had my kids, and they were reflecting just like a mirror. And I could look at them and be like, I don't like this. And like, actually, that comes from me. And that's where the work needs to be done on myself. So what have you learned from having your children, your beautiful girls, and how has that impacted your work?
I'll be totally honest with you. Yeah, so I was pregnant the first time, and I probably was, I'd call it naive, to be gentle on myself.
Have to be naive.
You do, you have to
Get
be
pregnant.
naive. But naive, but also a little bit, probably arrogant. Yeah.
I'm not going to do this.
Oh, have PhD, or doing a PhD, whatever, I can handle this. And you just don't know what you don't know. And as you say, you probably no harm. So the journey that I went through is no different to any other mum. And it is a wild and beautiful chaos. So I suppose I probably, as I said, went into it naive. But when I pause and take a moment to reflect, I do think that my children are my greatest teachers. They do stretch you, send you into a stretch zone like no other challenge. I used to sail a good bit, and I haven't in a while. But one time I did the Round Island sailing race, which is you leave from Wicklow and you sail around the country and land back into Wicklow. And it's pretty grueling, you're on the boat for however many days it takes. It's basic. There was a storm for 2 or 3 days, so you're wet, you're not changing your clothes. When the storm was going for more than 24 hours, it was difficult to wash your teeth because the boat was really rocking and people were seasick and everything was really, it was basic. When was that? I'd say maybe around 2020. But anyway, I distinctly remember my PhD supervisor said to me at the time, "Oh my gosh, you really love your freedom, she said, oh gosh, your freedom will be curtailed whenever you have children." Well, I just remembered it so well in those first few weeks of having a baby, because honestly, it felt quite similar.
Like being on the boat.
Like being on the boat. It did. That's the truth,
I love that.
Wild. Yeah. You don't realise.
The storm, the wind, the
storm,
shake,
can't have a shower. It's sweaty.
Yeah, and you don't get a trophy.
Well, the baby is.
The baby, yeah.
I mean, if you can, probably doesn't feel like it at the time.
Seeing the baby's development, that's your trophy.
Yeah, so that's why I feel so passionately that you just need to find those little moments, those little snippets where you can just be present in the childhood, because it is so busy. So I think that's something for me. And say earlier as well, I was talking about that transition of getting out of the house, and, so professionally, I know a transition I would refer to as kind of moving from one space and time to another, like going from indoors to outdoors, or getting up from a nap, whatever it is. That can be sometimes disconcerting or dysregulating for a child. And I actually noticed, you know what, it's dysregulating for me to get out the door, because it feels like a lot of tugging and pulling and trying to, got one coat on and that's been taken off while I'm putting on the other one. And, so like in those small moments, they are teaching you and stretching you. And I personally just find it really cool and really fascinating.
And how can we bring more joy into our everyday life when we're so busy and stressed and we have so much going on with our children? What are the things we can do to bring a little more joy into it?
I just, I really felt, when I went back to work this time, I want to be in work. I like work. I've worked hard to be in work. My workplace is super cool. I feel that my children enjoy going to their childcare setting, and for them that is their purpose, and they have a purpose around that. So I felt, when I paused from the other thing that I recognize is that, I have an image, I mentioned about my own mum working, and that's a powerful image to me, and her view on that of herself. So I suppose I felt that I wanted to be aware for these moments, or to have some of them, not to be letting things pass me by where I am not aware, perhaps sleepwalking. And I can have days like that, yes I can, but I just felt a determination within me to capture some of the moments. Like, we can't have it all the time, so I suppose I feel that I'm lucky that I am embedded in this knowledge, and that's what I wanted to do. I started that Instagram page because I wanted to share some of that. And when I notice a moment, it makes me think, oh, I'd love to share this. And I would love, that perhaps by reading that, somebody else notices that moment for themselves, and that draws their attention to it, and that they get that opportunity to just have that little pause, and have that little space, and maybe, a pat on the back as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially now with social media, we can feel so guilty. It adds so much guilt to what we do, because it looks like we're not doing enough, because everybody does more than we do, and everyone shows their bright side of their life, and then ours doesn't look like that all the time. Nobody does.
No.
And that it sounds like you're just sending little reminders of reality.
And maybe also, if we're dysregulated, we are feeling really exhausted, which it can, I can very, very much relate to. Maybe you call in the stress, and you the ones on social media that create a comparison speak louder to you. You know?
Yeah. Because you can relate to that.
Maybe, it's just where you're at the moment. So I suppose for me, I just feel so determined and so driven. Not every day is perfect, or every day is not perfect, or there are loads of not perfect days and moments in every day, but that I really feel determined to connect with those little moments of joy.
And that's a conscious decision for a positive mindset to find those moments.
Yeah, and I want to bring people along with me, and share that with others and connect with others around that.
Do you have any tips for other moms balancing work, family, and me time?
Yeah, I think that, as I said, it can be exhausting, it can be overwhelming. We've spoke about that a good bit. And the other thing that I think is, all of us, we kind of love giving advice, don't we? Yeah, I like giving advice,
But not to ourselves.
So I feel like I just don't want to add to advice. I just want to say, you know what? You have got this. You're doing a good job.
I love that. And we need to hear that more often, I think. Especially when we have babies and children. And we always bring it to that worked for me. You should try this. You should. I can't. You should. Someone says you should do this. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. So I just say, you've got this.
Yeah. Thank you. What does the future look like for you? What would you like to be saying? 2 years, 3 years, 5 years?
3 years. I, sometimes since I've been thinking about these moments with my children, sometimes I think, like, where will we be in 10 years? Or I see maybe a mom with teenagers and they're having a coffee and I'm like, my goodness, the time is going to be fly. And I really hope that's where I am. That's something that I always think about. And that for me connects into those moments of joy. Thinking about that and thinking about all these little moments. I try to think also where I am today and just try and be in that and live it, you know, and find grace for myself in that. I would love, you know, in my field, I'm an early stage researcher because I graduated recently. So those first 5 years you finish the PhD, you're early stage, even though I'm not spring chicken per se. But I'd love to continue to write and to research. So I am active in research at the moment and qualitative research, and I really enjoy that. So I'd love to continue that alongside lecturing. I mentioned the Instagram page, and I think I would like to continue with that as well and see where that goes. I've had loads of, you know, cross paths with lots of people in interesting ways. Like if I hadn't come on, I wouldn't have met you, wouldn't have had this experience, which is totally new
and that's
for me.
brave as well, because putting yourself out there at whatever stage, and like for me, that's a big step. It takes a lot of confidence in stepping out of your comfort zone, and that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable, yeah.
It's uncomfortable. It is so uncomfortable. And that for me goes back to your children being your teachers, because I wouldn't have started that page without my two girls. And yeah.
That's a really inspiring story. And I hope anyone listening, you know, we're not telling them they should do that, we're giving them the power that they have a choice.
Yeah.
And to believe in them and to just chase their dreams.
Yeah. 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 And I think maybe I'm trying to imagine a perspective of someone else, you know, maybe I go through all of these aspects of play and learning and the emotional connection. I don't think you can know all that, you know, but I'm hoping that maybe I can share snippets of it. Mm-hmm. And over time, as people go along, mums, if they're interested, they can connect more with it or as much as they want to in the time that they need it and when they're ready for it.
Absolutely. What's your page name?
It's the _play_lab_. Yeah.
Brilliant. So I'll add that here as well for everyone to follow along your journey. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to like, share and follow so you'll never miss out on upcoming episodes. See you next time!